Being a Marvel Comics fan a majority of my life, reading, viewing, and even trying to experience the actions of a superpowered Peter Parker, including throwing my right hand up forward with my middle and ring fingers pressed against my palms, thinking that I maybe too will spew some web-like material from my wrist, will forever be connected to my life. When it comes to video games, very few childhood gaming experiences topped Spider-Man and Venom Maximum Carnage, even though the game was nothing more than a stereotypical side-scrolling beat-em-up that I finished during a weekend rental. My dedication to Spider-Man video games slowly died out, with more and more mediocre entries released during the gaming generations that followed the 16-bit era. Almost 10 years after playing my last Spider-Man video game, I found myself excited with the idea of returning to New York in a world where costume heroes and villains are the norm. Not just due to the fact that it's a new Spider-Man game, but also because it's made by Insomniac Games, the developer responsible for the Infamous series as well as classics like Ratchet and Clank. The hype machine was working hard to make everyone with a PlayStation 4 understand they need to own this game. But is it worthy of such strong recommendation? It's time to put on the old red and blue tights and see if this is a superhero game truly powered beyond measure. With Spider-Man under the control of a player once again, this PS4 exclusive game is as beefy as any open world game on the market because Spider-Man can pick up many collectibles, stop active crimes, and, of course, complete a story isolated to this game, featuring the pressures Peter Parker must handle being both a costume superhero trying to do right by his deceased uncle, and attempting to rectify a weakened relationship between himself and his ex, Mary Jane Watson, without succumbing to homelessness and disappointing his boss and father figure, Dr. Octavius. Between the action sequences are objectives that the player is free to take part in, like picking up the hundreds of various collectibles, including fan service-filled backpacks, and taking photos of various landmarks in this version of New York. My initial plans were to simply finish the story, side missions, and pick up some various trophies. But upon discovering the relatively easy, yet time-consuming trophy list, I took on the challenge, including adding personal accomplishments to my playthrough, like getting a gold rating on all 16 Taskmaster challenges, and completing the subtasks attached to each enemy stronghold base before finishing the main story for a platinum-worthy playthrough that lasted around 40 hours after the game started off with a figurative, then literal bang. After months of hype and even a little bit of controversy, Marvel's Spider-Man has arrived and proves to be one of, if not the best games featuring everyone's favorite neighborhood spider. As expected, web slinging around this version of New York is incredibly intuitive from the onset, with the right trigger being used to sling and the X button to propel forward. To top off the swinging is wall running, parkour moves that allow Spider-Man to jump over certain obstacles, and even upgradable skills specific to moving around the map, including pulling off moonsaults and tricks in midair. Though it will take the player a little bit of effort to get used to the timing when pulling off swings and jumps, the exhilarating feeling of playing as Spider-Man as he makes his way through New York is almost immediate when given the opportunity to actually play the game. Though moving around walls inside buildings or even outside at lower altitudes can prove to be a hassle due to the camera moving in too close or objects like trees and walls not becoming see-through. Tying into web slinging is the combat. Spider-Man can jump off walls to throw punches, shoot his webbing to toss enemies or even disarm them, and use a double trigger tap to zip towards safety like an overhead steel beam. But what about when Spidey is going toe-to-toe with his enemies? Improving upon the gameplay initially used in the Spider-Man 2 game available over a decade ago, the masked Marvel can throw a variety of punches and kicks thanks to the player simply hitting or holding the square button, that fills a meter under Spider-Man's health that can both help him heal or pull off finishing sequences. Mixing in jumps and web slinging by tapping the X and triangle buttons respectively will have Spider-Man pulling off impressive combos. One of the most important things regarding this game's combat system is dodging. By pressing the circle button in correlation with Spidey's spider sense going off, can create opportunities for counterattacks, especially when Spider-Man is leveled up. With a fantastic amount of abilities, the player can purchase with skill points earned by leveling up Spider-Man. Unlike the Batman Arkham fighting engine this game gets compared to so much, Spider-Man's combat system shows just how vulnerable the protagonist really is, as dodging and countering is solely up to the player's ability and timing, instead of enemy attacks being parried and countered automatically, making the fighting in Spider-Man more fulfilling and difficult when taking on copious enemies. There's also a stealth system, but it's usually reserved for certain missions or the early sections of enemy bases. This game's version of fortresses, such as the ones seen in the recent Far Cry games. By perching Spidey atop an enemy, the player can web a nearby target without repercussion if no one is around to see it happen. There are some very interesting features added to the overall gameplay that makes combat even more entertaining than just the base system. Of course, there's the aforementioned skill tree that features 3 sections, one focusing on web slinging and web-based attacks, melee improvements, and ranged abilities, though these skills do mix across the 3 tree branches sometimes. The skill tree can easily be completed if Spider-Man is fully leveled up to level 50. Also obtainable and upgradable are gadgets Spider-Man can use in both battle and completing mission objectives. Toys like web bombs for quick tying up of enemies, and even a spider buddy that will assist its creator when called into combat are fantastic ways to mix things up. By the game's end, Spider-Man is a walking electronics store, able to take down a football team-sized group of enemies without throwing a single punch or kick. One of the best features attached to the combat is the implementation of suits. With tokens that are gained through the completion of random crimes, attaining collectibles, and finishing challenges such as base missions, the player can purchase upgrades for Spidey's gadgets and even Spider suits, with each suit having a specific ability that is activated by pressing both analog sticks simultaneously and has a recharge time, such as becoming temporarily bulletproof or having Spidey jump and spin while shooting web lines in every direction. Suits can be given up to 3 modifiers, allowing a variety of benefits including better healing and reduced damage from melee attacks. What makes suits even better in this game is the fact that once purchased, the abilities and mods can be applied to any suit, meaning the player can mix and match their favorite abilities with their favorite suits, even in the middle of battle. Enemies are typical for a game like this, with additions to the ranks when it comes to variations as the game progresses. Starting off with the melee-focused street thugs, Spider-Man eventually has to adapt to different enemies literally gunning for him, including brutes that must be fully webbed before Spidey can land an effective attack. As the game progresses, these enemy types come together and will force the player to be on top of Spidey's game if they want to succeed. For all the positives in regards to the gameplay, the story is a mixed bag. Starting off strongly, featuring Kingpin and Shocker, the game becomes focused on a mysterious gang simply known as the Demons. The narrative mostly focuses on Spidey trying to stop Mr. Negative, leaving some of the more heavily promoted and infamous adversaries for later in the game. Unfortunately, the plot's pacing can leave people somewhat bored, especially during the stealth sections featuring Mary Jane and Miles Morales. Tied to the surprising lack of usage in regards to villains such as Rhino until the final act is the fact that a majority of the boss battles are incredibly underwhelming, including some 2-on-1 fights, like Spidey vs. Electro and the Vulture, that boils down to dodging and throwing projectiles back at his opponents before a QuickTime event occurs. Considering the universe and the enemies, the boss battles could have been some of the most memorable encounters from any video game this generation. Instead, Spider-Man's boss battles are just a lackluster step toward the next well-acted and incredibly designed cutscene. While the boss usage may be disappointing, the voice work and overall presentation is outstanding and easily stands head and shoulders above anything Spider-Man related outside of the comics, especially when focusing on the relationships between Peter Parker and Mary Jane and Dr. Octavius. And the somewhat outrageous J. Jonah Jameson doing his best Alex Jones impression, with Spider-Man being the thing that makes his blood boil on the radio. And even some of the minor characters are well crafted and scripted, even if they're on screen for a short period of time, including the Kingpin. Beyond the main campaign missions are a handful of side missions that are mostly unimaginative fetch quests, or beating up a few people. Sadly, the side missions actually had a lot more potential from a storytelling perspective, as seen thanks to one sequence of missions leading up to a boss battle with Tombstone. The Taskmaster challenges, a series of timed missions focusing on fisticuffs, web slinging, and stealth, also provide boss battles, but those are the only ones. Base completion sees Spider-Man fighting wave after wave of enemies, and that's it. Collecting all the backpacks or taking pictures of landmarks are only there for fan service and busy work needed for full completion. Some activities are even locked until later in the game, yet are the same content introduced in the first couple of hours, without much to differentiate itself from all the other open world games on the market right now. Even though the repetition factor is high, thanks to a great traversal system, including hilarious loading screens when fast traveling, and fun combat makes the usually boring bits of open world gameplay a lot less tedious. Technically, Spider-Man is very strong, though there will be graphical glitches you'll encounter without becoming a game-breaking experience, including stuck enemies and NPCs somehow talking without their lips moving. With so much to handle from a presentation standpoint, not once did the game crash or freeze. Spider-Man isn't the perfect superhero game, let alone the perfect open-world action-adventure offering, but it does show just how much potential the franchise has in regards to this entertainment medium under the command of Insomniac Games, while delivering a memorable experience for mostly all the right reasons. In a year of extraordinary video game offerings, Spider-Man on the PlayStation 4 stands out as a true example of high-quality superhero gaming done right. The positives can't be argued against, as the game delivers enthralling combat, near-perfect web-slinging, and some wonderful acting both visually and from voice acting perspectives. But the game does have some glaring flaws, including underwhelming boss fights, a no-no with such an impressive roster of interesting villains such as the ones from the Spider-Man universe, repetitive open-world tropes when it comes to mission structure and collectibles, and a somewhat poorly paced story, especially when the focus is off the man in the mask. While it's unfortunate the game isn't sheer superpowered perfection, Spider-Man is a fantastic, must-play experience that will give anyone at least 20 hours of fun, without even completing everything, including taking pictures of toy cats, catching pigeons, or that meal Peter had in mind for MJ, before stripping down in her apartment to go out and fight some more crime.
System thingy. Looks like a residential break-in.
Charles Standish.
That sounds familiar. Oh, Oscorp CFO. Wait. You don't think this has anything to do with Lee, do you?
Sorry to cook and run.
Did you just leave your clothes on the kitchen floor?
Where do you want me to,
Just a couch is fine.
See you later?
Yeah.
I understand we have another low-information caller who thinks we're better off thanks to Spider-Man. Let's see if I can set her straight. You're on with J. Jonah Jameson.
I just want to say that I've never seen Manhattan so safe and peaceful. Compare what it was like when Spider-Man first showed up to now.
Okay, fair enough, I will. Then, we had police and firefighters doing a wonderful job. There was crime, sure, but nothing they couldn't handle. Of course, we do have things now we didn't have then. Maniacs who shoot electricity out of their eyes, walking piles of sand, Nazis made of bees!
Didn't Spider-Man put all those guys in jail?
You're missing the point! They didn't exist before he came along. At best, he attracts them. But I've often wondered if they're in cahoots.
Wow, I've never actually heard anyone say cahoots before. Look, all I'm saying is, I'd hate to imagine what would have happened if all those guys showed up and Spider-Man wasn't here.
Another lost cause. Goodbye.